Shiba Gaku, you're just a freshman, and yet you've such an insolent behavior. Huh? You know about me, the guy who kicks the ass of anyone that piss him off. Yup, that's me. This might be one of the best introductions to a series I've ever seen. The art, the characters, and the oh-so-glorious translation come together in a way I can only describe as magical. I've stepped into someone else's world, and I can only imagine what it has in store for me. Sugarless by Hosokawa Masami might be the greatest manga to ever exist. Possibly on purpose, probably by accident. The series is bad but not downright awful. It has a sincerity and intensity which makes it an enthralling read. The premise goes like this. There's this guy named Shake who is the school's toughest fighter that has his name written on a banner which hangs from the roof's windmill. Everyone who attends this school wants to fight and beat him so they can claim they're the strongest. Many try, but they always fail. That may sound simple enough, however, the plot itself is batshit, something the first chapter and its 70 pages of glory make all too apparent. As the new semester begins, a first-year student, who I'm going to call Scrappy Doo, decides to call out Shake and begins fighting everyone. After a, interesting exchange with an upperclassman, we learn that Scrappy believes himself to be an animal because during junior high, he hit another kid. That's it. That's his whole reason for doing what he's doing. It's really dumb, yet the series plays it completely straight. Then, from out of nowhere, this huge SOB in black busts through the second-story window, kicking Scrappy and his opponent both in the head, knocking them out. His reason for doing something so absurd? He needed to use the bathroom. That's it. We're only on page 23. Eventually, after Scrappy and Afro... Right, Big Man then. After Scrappy and Big Man get to know each other, a sophomore with delusions of grandeur, the dialogue really is something else, decides to interrupt Big Man's lunch. He then proceeds to get manhandled and suplexed. This is page 36. Scrappy and Big Man then talk about the windmill, the desire everyone seems to have at becoming the school's strongest, where we get our first glimpse at the series' sly self-awareness. Big Man thinks the whole thing is stupid. Unlike the others, he's only attending because his grades suck. Sugarless, however, doesn't give us much time to let what he said sink in, as Scrappy then gets angry and proceeds to make a grievous mistake. He messes with Big Man's lunch. We're on page 45. Jumping ahead a bit, the entire student body decides to beat the piss out of Scrappy Doo because they've had enough of his shit. The guy who kicks the ass of anyone that piss him off. That's me. As you would expect, Big Man doesn't appreciate how unfair the fight before him is and drop kicks his way into the fray. Together, the pair whip the ass of, well, everybody, resulting in them getting Shake's attention, ending chapter 1. This nonsensical intensity, the absurdity, doesn't relent and remains a constant throughout Sugarless. So much so that this exchange we see in chapter 1 continues into chapter 5. On the first day of school, we see Saitama punt a puppy, Naoto crush a man's skull, and a motherfucker bend a crowbar with his teeth. This is then followed by the second day of school, where things start making even less sense. A guy is kicked through a door, just because. Big Man rejects joining a gang led by a 15-year-old smoker who looks like he's in his late 20s because its name is stupid. Scrappy has a flashback in the midst of a tirade where he recalls plucking his grandfather's nose hairs, as you do, and Naoto, with cheeks firmly clenched, takes a page out of Baki and trains his body in one of the most ridiculous ways imaginable. Everything I just described, with little exaggeration, happens before chapter 10, and we're not even at the truly crazy parts yet. In fact, the second day of school hasn't even ended. We don't reach that point until chapter 15. Sugarless is a trip. it's just one thing you can't wholly understand after another. The story itself is junk and more than a little predictable. However, everything surrounding it is just so mesmerizing. Yeah, that's the word. I'm mesmerized. It has me under a spell and leaves me dumbfounded. It isn't any one aspect of the manga doing this though, but rather everything together. As I alluded to previously, Sugarless's dialogue is great. It's campy, blunt, and awful, with some real big brain logic thrown into the mix, but it's sincere. You can tell Hosokawa either believes what he's putting down on the page, or that he's merely writing to entertain. Regardless, it's good stuff and gives every exchange a lot of character. Having said that, there is something I want to point out. Currently, at least as far as I'm aware, only 7 out of Sugarless's 13 volumes have been unofficially translated by at least 3 different teams. As you can probably gather, the series isn't exactly popular. Who would have guessed? At least popular enough for an official translation. So fans took it upon themselves to do precisely that. I want to state outright, I applaud the work of all those involved. Every rendition has its own charms, which adds to the experience. Having said that, said charms do not come without quirks. The first group, which might actually be an official translation, I can't tell, is rife with grammatical issues and only covers the first chapter. It, however, really makes the series' introduction stand out. The second group, Vendetta Scans, straight up does a great job. There weren't any issues which took me out of the experience, and the lettering was on point. The third group, however, Artificial Demons, went all out with the swearing. They don't hold back. This isn't an issue by any means, but it was a bit jarring at first come the transition from one group to another at chapter 23. Now, the art itself isn't anything to write home about. It isn't good and a bit goofy, with some bizarre proportions. However, when put into the story's context, I can't help but crack up. You have these first-year high schoolers, right? Probably 15 to 16 years old, and yet quite a few of them look like adults at least in their 20s. This isn't a problem the series has alone, not by a long shot. However, by keeping that fact in mind, every exchange, every fight just seems all that much more ridiculous. This goes hand in hand with the fights themselves. They're never all that interesting despite being in an action series. No clever tactics are ever employed. In fact, the choreography is quite simple. The narrative stakes are usually very minimal, excluding the stuff with Santa, which I was genuinely entertained by, and often lack any real motivation for the characters in question. Everything that makes a fight in manga and comics pop just isn't present. People punch each other. Sometimes they kick. That's it. Yet, in spite of what I just said, I think this works perfectly. Again, no matter how you look at it, Sugarless is a story about school kids wailing on each other. These types of fights are never pretty or all that fancy. Believe me, I know from experience. However, they mean something to those involved. They give their all, even if the reasons for doing so are really goddamn stupid. Every punch has a real sense of impact. Each dropkick is hype as hell because Sugarless's charmingly wonky art and the over-the-top writing gives the series an energy which feels, well, all too real. Whatever fight is placed before them becomes the single most important thing to the characters, which I find true to life. With very few exceptions, I cannot recall the reasons why I threw down with someone else, but I do recall young me believing it was something I had to do. In the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter, but in that moment, it did. It is this particular mindset, this feeling, which Sugarless does a great job at portraying through its visuals, dialogue, and story. However, it does something else, something which I can't find the proper word to describe. Deconstruction is the closest thing that comes to mind, but it doesn't feel entirely accurate. Screw it. We're going with that. Deconstruction. As I hoped to have illustrated, Sugarless is dumb. Gloriously so. It has a lot of tropes and cliches common to battle manga as well as the delinquent genre, but it has just enough self-awareness to make me wonder, is this deliberate? What do I mean by this? Well, the characters in Sugarless do a lot of stupid things. However, they make sense within the context of the world and genre both. An example of this would be Big Man and his absurdly large lunches, something which reappears throughout the story and in a lot of other series. This on its own isn't all that important. It's mostly just a cutaway gag that results in us seeing the multitude of things the boyo is shoving into his face. But within the first few chapters, Scrappy calls attention to this as well as what exactly is being eaten. He points out that most of the food is junk, and that if he keeps eating it in such massive quantities, he's going to develop health problems. Namely,
diabetes.
It's bizarre, right? But it only gets stranger. In these early chapters, we see Big Man eat 2 cups of instant noodles, a box of fried noodles, and a hot dog. Now, I enjoy most of these things. However, I'm aware they aren't exactly healthy. Big Man claims he's eating such a massive calorie diet to help him build muscle. This makes sense, mostly. But then he drops this gem, which calls everything into question. In the midst of a fight, while eating, he claims that if someone wants to build muscle, they should eat things like high-protein, low-calorie chicken. This is genuinely good dietary advice being dropped at a strange time, right after we see Big Man fill his stomach with junk. I might be looking too deeply into things, but this seems deliberate. Sugarless frames Big Man's awful diet in a more real-world sense, calls attention to it, then never brings it up again as the story keeps pressing on. This sort of self-awareness can be seen quite often. However, it isn't over the top, on the nose. The series, when you least expect it, will continue with its cliched plot, only to momentarily point it out, play it straight, and move on as if nothing had happened. It knows it's ridiculous, but revels in that fact. And I think I finally know why. Unlike a lot of other pieces of media that attempt a deconstruction, Sugarless isn't looking to deconstruct a genre, but rather a mindset, namely that of a teenage boy who keeps getting into fights. When you're 15, all the way up to 18 and beyond, you see yourself as older than you are, cooler than you are, and often have these grand ideas, notions that are just silly when you take the time to actually think about them. Sugarless creates a world built around these ideas, plays it completely straight so it can explore this particular mindset. The series isn't passing judgment. In fact, it goes with the joke, only to ask questions along the way, point out what doesn't make sense, just so you yourself can do the same. This, unto itself, begs its own question. Why would Hosokawa do this? Personally, assuming of course I'm not simply digging way too far into things, which is more than just possible, it's actually very likely. I believe he wanted to capture that feeling of unbridled angst that comes with high school, give a genuine sense of what it's like, how he and possibly others saw things, while still trying to tell an entertaining story. Sugarless is stupid, dumb, and sometimes cringy, because at that age, we were stupid, dumb, and sometimes cringy. Not everyone can relate to being a punch-happy delinquent. I get it. However, I'm pretty sure we can all recall a time where we believed ourselves and the actions we took were far more serious than they had any right to be. That's what the series captures. At least, I think, as well as desperately hope. Sugarless is a stupid manga, but I think that might be the point. It's immensely entertaining and crafted in such a way that I simply couldn't put it down. It's so bad it's great. an accidental masterpiece that could have come about on purpose. Having said that though, it does begin to drag toward the end of its translation, during the Doppelganger High School War arc, which is a sentence, and the untranslated chapters may be genuinely awful, but for what's readily available and out there, I think it's a great time. Though everything I said towards the end might be full of crap, which is again, very likely, I think all of you should give it a read. But with that said guys, I've been Boofar191, tell me what you thought in the comments down below, I'll see all you guys next time, goodbye.